aka Lower Alberton. And it's a beautiful, beautiful afternoon. And I'm so excited that next couple of seconds we're going to be bringing a dear friend of ours. And many of you are dear friends that you already are. Some of you know Nontombi personally, you know her intimately, you know her as a consultant, and I'm so honored to bring her on the show too. Again, such timeless activity. It's a story credit, short interest of such a fine. Well, it's 3:30. I like the countdown clock, but not that much. Let me just wrap it up with as we go into the show. From the 12:30 show, we're so grateful that we had Pastor Wesley van Graan from, well, he's from the United States of the Western Cape in Gordons Bay, but now from the real USA in North Carolina. Yeah. She's in studio, everybody, the virtual studio, that is. I'm so honored to bring to South Africa and around the world the Reverend Nontombi Tutu. What's up, girlfriend?
Hey, Batum. Hey, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good on you.
I'm doing well. I'm doing well.
You gotta know this is a highlight of the day. You know why. I'm not gonna tell everybody else why, but you know why. It's a highlight of my day. Well, friends, this is us, and we're gonna be together hosting the show with you. So you know you've heard a lot from me. I'll just have Nontombi to greet you all, and then Nontombi, because we're sharing in the show today, I'd like you to let people know where we're gonna be going, and as they listen in, I'll say a few words after that. But ladies and gentlemen, won't you please, if you're on there or you're gonna be on later on the live broad stream, it's my honor to bring to South Africa and around the world in such a time as this. There's global pandemics. Racism is rearing its ugly head. Gender-based violence is out of whack. And who better than to be in conversation with one that has been at the forefront of these issues than my dear friend, Reverend Nontombi Tutu. And the crowd goes, wow.
Nice.
Over to you, man.
Hey, hi. Hey, and I wanted to first of all to explain about the title thing, because when we spoke, when we first planned this, I was indeed Reverend Canon Nontombi Tutu. I was Canon Missioner at All Souls Cathedral here in Asheville, North Carolina. I have since left that position, and I am now just Reverend Nontombi Tutu. The canon goes when you leave the cathedral. And I am actually getting ready to move to Los Angeles. What's so funny is, when I put
talking about my Los Angeles, like LA in Lower Alberton, or the real one?
No, the real LA.
The real LA.
What is so funny is when I put that up, a friend at home reminded me that the area that I grew up in Orlando West, used to be called Beverly Hills. I don't know whether it's still called Beverly Hills, but it was Beverly Hills, that area, Orlando West extension. And so I'm moving to All Saints Beverly Hills, Los Angeles. So from Beverly Hills to Beverly Hills, that's me.
Wow. So, well, friends, we are in the show, and those of you that have become accustomed to what we do, there's some story sharing moment that we'll be getting into, and then also some thought leadership. But let me do justice by my dear friend who's in studio, part of our culture at home and around the world, but more especially to South African culture, to give some due to colleagues and friends who are leaders. And those of you that know the show and what we've been doing is to bring people that are really doing the work of social justice, people who are really geared towards understanding and working with those that are on the other side of the railway tracks, those that are marginalized, those like Howard Thurman would have us reminded are living with their backs against the wall. And so let me take a moment to read from the profile, the professional profile of the speaker, clearly the consultant that has been in the space for many years around diversity issues and justice issues, and now a minister, fellow minister, yes, in the Anglican way of spirituality, but continuing this journey of a legacy that is our legacy. So let us read. The Reverend Nontombi Naomi Tutu, as you heard us say earlier, no longer canon. The challenges of growing black and female in apartheid South Africa have been the foundation of Naomi's life. As an activist for human rights, those experiences taught her that our whole human family loses when we accept situations of oppression, and how the teaching and preaching hate and division injure us all. Reverend Tutu is the third child of Archbishop Desmond and Nomaliza Leah Tutu. She was born in South Africa and had the opportunity to live in many communities and countries. From early in her life, she would say, I have my father's nose. I don't want his job. I just thought I had to bring that one in because it just and she knows she said it several times over. Yet continued to feel and sense this call that she could not refuse. And so, some years later in her journey, decided to take up the call and go into ministry. It was in her 50s only that she responded to this call and went to seminary.
Man, why must you say the age, Ngoku?
Okay, apologies, but it's here in the profile. Okay, sorry, it was in the 20s.
I was a teenager.
She was a teenager, yes, and it's a new teenager, yes. Professional experience. Those of you that are out there, especially in the States today, why I want to read this is because we need voices that can come alongside, that are courageous, that are willing to do the work in depth. So her professional experience ranges from a development consultant in West Africa to being program coordinator for programs on race and gender-based violence in education at the African Gender Institute at the University of Cape Town. In addition, Reverend Tutu has taught at the University of Hartford, University of Connecticut, and Brevet College in North Carolina. She served as a program coordinator for the Historic Race Relations Institute at Fisk University and was part of the Institute's delegation to the World Conference Against Racism in Durban. She's also been a public speaker and continues to serve avidly for the rights of people around the world. Friends, that's my paying homage and respect to Reverend Nontombi Tutu. Nontombi, thank you for taking time to be with us today. It's really an honor to have you on the show. And I'm hoping that to people who would be able to come on in and be a part of the online broadcast and maybe later see this resource, that they will be blessed from our conversation today.
Thank you.
Nontombi, tell us a little bit about how things are going in the States right now. I mean, obviously, we know that that's been the space. And what are you? I know that this last week you were busy at another amazing event where you were called to preach and teach on justice issues in such a time as this. So give us a little bit of a viewpoint of how you are engaging the United States of America, and possibly as we listen, what can we learn so many millions of miles away in South Africa and around the world?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm sure that people at home and around the world are seeing the effects of the pandemic here in the United States, and the effects of racialized violence, particularly police violence against Black men and women. And so it is really an intense time here, and we have unfortunately very bad political leadership in terms of response to the pandemic. The response initially was to make people essential workers. So this meant that people were required to go to work even when it was health danger. And one of the things that we have been highlighting in that is the fact that the vast majority of those who were identified as essential workers are people who are Black and brown, people who are immigrants, people who are first generation American, people who are some of the lowest paid in the United States, many of whom do not even have health insurance. So wow. Pandemic has brought out the inequalities that exist in the US. particularly the ways in which race continues to play a major role in people's access to work opportunities and to health care. And then, of course, in the midst of that, we had the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And these again elevated and brought to light the extent to which Black people in particular, but also brown people and people of and other people of color are targeted and killed often by the police. Because when you think of George Floyd, that the arrest was over a possible counterfeit $20 bill. A $20 bill cost that man his life, right? And people still try and justify it. Breonna Taylor, the police broke into her apartment without declaring that they were police. And when her boyfriend tried to defend them, shot and killed her in her own bed. So those are the kinds of things that we are trying to highlight in the US, that you can talk about the US as this land of opportunity, but we have to face the reality of the way economics, health, and even access to your very life is conditioned by racism in this country. And the event we talked about was last week I was in Fort Wayne, Indiana, where young people have been leading protests about police violence. And part of their question was, where are the clergy? Where are the faith leaders in our struggle? Because the faith leaders are not here. We don't see them marching with us. We don't hear them preaching from their pulpits about the injustice that we are suffering. Where are they? And so I was brought in by Faith in Indiana, which is a group, a coalition of faith leaders, basically to talk to fellow clergy and say, where are you? Where are we? We cannot let our children be on the front lines, and we are nowhere to be seen. And so I used one of my favorite texts as the basis for that, and that was Amaziah versus Amos, where Amaziah is the high priest, and his concern is about the king. And Amos comes to remind him that you're not supposed to hold allegiance to a government, to a king, to the powerful. Your allegiance is meant to be to God, a God who calls us to struggle for justice. And so I put it to our clergy, our fellow clergy. Who are we going to be in this time? Are we going to be Amaziahs, or are we going to be Amoses?
Wow. Thank you so much for just sharing with us. And maybe if I can just give you some kind of how we are journeying in such a time as this. I'm grateful for the South African Council of Churches in South Africa that have done some amazing work. Those of us that don't know, what has been important is, even when we think upon the COVID-19 and the coronavirus, was to have our people understand what this pandemic would do. So I'm grateful for that, in that way, that the church has taken action to bring about communication in 11 official languages, made it accessible to churches and other religious and community organizations. Also, Nontombi, I'm happy to report that since March, non-profit organizations have kind of kicked in, even though it's been tough economic realities, because you can imagine, shutdown coming to the economy, non-profit organizations also take a hit, yeah? But organizations like the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, organizations like Heartlines, in a moment we'll see a little video material that they're doing, have got engaged in reaching out to people, and many churches all across South Africa, primarily around issues of food security. And we saw that. And then on top of it, while dealing with the coronavirus, yes, we too were captured by what happened to George Floyd, as the world has been captured by. Now, Now, again, you want to be clear, like even as you say, it was a reality of a $20, fraudulent, bill, and even if that's the truth of the matter, does it still, allow or should allow for a person to lose their life in that way, in that kind of way, or even lose their life at all? But what it made us was to reflect on what was happening here in our own country's context. So many people have been frustrated by the fact that it took for a global occurrence, which has been in the States, for us to respond to some of the pains that are happening here, where pain, anger, anguish, and the militant voices and militant activities of our police have been hurled primarily on people living in townships. Now, this is not that it didn't happen in Umhlanga, or it didn't happen in Santon, or it didn't happen in Hermanus. But by and large, I think it's been a reality check that our police, in a country where we have majority Black African people, Black African people have been largely affected in the most disruptive, militant way. So these are some of the difficulties that we've been facing. Gender-based violence. I mean, our president just made a call this week, 2 weeks ago, not this week. For some people, they wished it was this week, because he took all the booze, all the July, took it off the table, and there was no, if I can say,
No warning.
notice,
We couldn't stock.
no warning,
So we couldn't
nothing.
stock up.
Nobody, they couldn't top up. But this is the reality. As soon as alcohol was back in the swing, we had an increase in gender-based violence again, and we had an increase in the fact that we had, untoward accidents happening because of overconsumption of alcohol. So there's been a clear link that we've been paying attention to that, and we cannot afford for our medical emergencies to be running around to people that are getting drunk and messed up out of their mind. So that's just some of the land space that we find ourselves in. And, I think in this time, we're wanting to step toward how can we build a knowledge base that disrupts the dominant narrative, but actually do it in a way that's personal. So that people, because if we think upon it, Mr. Chauvin and Mr. Floyd, were they ever afforded the opportunity to see one another face to face? Were they ever afforded an opportunity to engage one another as human beings? And I mean, there's a lot of work that you, or your family more especially, and you have spoken about this interconnectedness, this reality of Ubuntu. So today, as we think upon it, we'd like to take a moment to move into this place of story. And before I plan the moment, how have you been seeing the power of story assisting you, where we see interrelations building? How have you been able to utilize your own story? Because I know as a public speaker, you've already been going about utilizing your story, but what has this meant for people when they've heard your story and got to understand? And how have you used story to begin to do this beloved community work?
I use stories. I've always used stories, the stories of my own life, the stories of people who I respect, to make the connection with people. And I think the most recently, the church that I served here in Asheville, that I served. Oh my goodness, I still say that. The church that I served is a predominantly white church. And during this time of pandemic, one of the things that we were doing was giving people different videos every day, so that to connect with our parishioners. And parishioners would actually spread these videos to family and friends. And I have heard from people who I don't even know, who received some of the videos. And the one in particular that struck people was following the murder of Ahmaud Arbery that happened in Georgia, that young man who was basically hunted and shot by 3 white men. That I shared the story of my response to the killing of Trayvon Martin by George Zimmerman, because that killing happened at the time when my son Mpilo was close to Trayvon's age. And my initial response was to want to protect my child, not to allow him to go out, not to do, not to allow him to do anything. I tracked him like he was a criminal. Every time he walked out of the door, I was like, where are you going? Call me when you get to where you're going. Who are you going to be with? If you change your mind, get back in touch with me. I don't care what, and try to basically lock him away. And I realized that, I could not keep doing that to him or to myself even. And so I wrote him a letter. And part of what brought me to write that letter was reading Thurman, Thurman, who is one of my favorite theologians, Jesus and the Dispossessed. And in there, the chapter about fear, he talks about, how fear is actually the real thing that oppresses the children of the oppressed. That we who are oppressed teach our children fear to keep them safe. And so that is a way that their childhood is stolen from them. Their own humanity, in fact, is stolen from them. And he says, but when the oppressed, the adults have that faith in Christ, have that knowledge of Christ, recognize the God in themselves, they are able to free their children from that fear, and that allows their children to soar, to go beyond anything that they and the world imagined that they could ever do. And so I originally actually had the conversation with my son and read him that chapter, that little segment from Thurman about the fear. And I said to him, so I want you to hear this, and I want you to know that I am releasing you from my fear. And part of the reason that I am able to release you from my fear is that when I read that Thurman part, it reminded me of the community that I came out of. Black South Africans in the townships under apartheid, and yet the adults in those communities released us from fear, made us aware that we were made in God's image, made us aware that apartheid is a lie and is not the end of God's story for South Africa. And so that I said, and as I remembered that was a freedom that was given to me by my parents, my grandparents, the whole community around us, the church, that then I had the responsibility also to release him from my fear. Wow. And I said, I want you to know it so that because there are going to be days when I forget that I've said I've released you from my fear, and my fear will come up to the top and I will be at you again saying, where are you going? No, you can't go. I'm going to put a bracelet on your leg so that I know where you are at all times. But you will be able to remind me that, Ma, you said you were releasing me from your fear. And you told me why and the whole story about it. And once I shared that story with our parishioners, so many of them sent it out to family and friends that I was hearing back from people who I had not met and saying, that was such a powerful thing in two ways. One, for us as white people to understand the level of fear that Black people live with on a daily basis in terms of access, just allowing their children to do normal things, to make the normal mistakes that teenagers will make. They're not meant to make, but they will make. That for so many Black people, that those mistakes end up costing them their lives. So one, to know about that fear, but secondly, to know about the faith in God, to know about a community that holds you up in those times and reminds you that you are God's child, no matter what the rest of the world might say.
Powerful words. I mean, First Timothy comes to mind, not given a spirit of fear, but instead a spirit of power and love and sound mind. So if you're out there, I know that some of you are coming in from the URCSA. I'm with Reverend Nontombi Tutu. You're welcome to take a quotable quote. The best way we know how to do this online, quote per quote, or hook a question into it, and you can put it in the chat line on that's available. So you all are welcome to be a part of this moment. As I draw out of what you just said, Nontombi, this reality of fear, I want to cut away to this video. For those of you that will watch it this time, I'd like you to watch it in light of how story can unwork and allow us to unlearn the fear that has been constructed around us. Now, I just want to be inclusive in this way. For those of you that are struggling with, well, when we're talking about Black lives and so on, I want you to know that the best spirit of that movement is focused on everybody. But until Black lives are going to be placed in a space where their bodies are not being hurled, the oppressions of our system, all of us can start to say, well, we're going to be on the side of Black Lives Matter. Now, I know that even in South Africa, coming this Friday, those of you that are out there, the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation will be hosting a conference on Friday night. So if you don't know about it, check out their Facebook page about racism in sport. And we want you to begin to unpack this. How does racism, gender bias, how does exclusion move into a space? But when we are living in a space of fear, like Nontombi, you said it so beautifully, you had to take a moment with your son to let him know the fears that have been set in motion cannot continue to live with and breathe in and amongst us. So if we take this moment, we'll come back with myself and Nontombi in a moment, but let's just take this moment to reflect on a video that comes to us from an organization called Heartlines. And Heartlines moved a campaign right across this country. 18,000 people who were afforded the opportunity to break down the stereotypes, to break down the fears that have been occurring amongst us from different communities, different races, different class distinctions, different language. Can you imagine? 18,000 people. It happened before the coronavirus. It happened before this global pandemic of racism has been exacerbated like it did. It happened before the economic crises that we have seen. But we were allowed to see this happen. And we need this kind of work to continue. So like Nontombi already primed us. Inspiring story. Check this out as we take a moment away from the screen.
The world moves fast around us. Sometimes it feels like a blur. We pass each other and make judgments of each other constantly. You're doing it right now, seeing this woman across the street. We cross and recross, but rarely connect. We struggle to understand each other, so we don't trust each other. I know your name, but I don't know who you are. You know my name, but do you know my story? What would help us see beyond our perceptions? Story. Our stories are what make us human. Stories have the power to overcome our perceptions. Sharing a story isn't hard. It's a simple human act, connecting us deeper to people we already know. Reach out, ask, invite, then listen, truly listen. Stories have the power to overcome our perceptions. They help us understand. Ask, listen, tell. It's our way of building our nation. Heartlines has developed resources to help you on this journey. These resources will empower you to build understanding, trust, and reconciliation through personal storytelling. Imagine if we were part of a powerful wave of change, one story at a time. We all have a story to tell. What's your story?
We all have a story to tell. What's your story? In South Africa, if I ask that question in a wrong way, as ek say, hey, what's your story? And that's a different style. But there's an inquiring way to put that question, to ask, listen, and tell. I'm in studio with Reverend Nontombi Tutu, and it's really exciting as we do conversational story sharing. Nontombi, that's just a great resource that we've been using with church communities, some corporate communities, and youth organizations around
Mhm.
partnership with Heartlines, organizations like SACLI, the South African Council of Churches, different church bodies and corporate business right across South Africa. It's just been an honor for us to be utilizing story to build empathy, understanding, and trust in
Mhm.
such a time as this. So yeah, that's just, so I don't know. How do you feel about that resource as you watched it with me?
Yes, that was a powerful video, and I think that that is true. That stories, that part of the ways that systemic injustice is able to continue is by othering, by pretending that the other person doesn't have a story, that there is, that there all there is that facade that you see, and that you don't, that there isn't a person, right? Because part of being human is having a story. And so we can dehumanize people who we decide don't have a story, or who we decide we know their story, because we know by looking at them exactly who they are. And so yes, so the telling of story is such an important part of any reconciliation work. I mean, we saw that in South Africa with just with with the beginning that the TRC tried to make, in terms of telling the stories of those who suffered most under apartheid, and having those stories be clearly part of our story as a country, right? That not letting those stories be hidden anymore, not letting those stories be something that is held by those who suffered only, but that those stories we took on as our stories as a country.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. And as you are here with us, there may be some of you that are online and will get access to this resource. So you may be watching it right now. Feel free to add into the conversation. I'm with Nontombi Tutu, and we want to move into a moment now of some thought leadership. Nontombi, when we set up this series of the last month, we said to ourselves here in South Africa, as we reach South Africa and around the world, more especially today with you, I'm figuring this club is going to get into the Carolina space where you're at and everywhere else. But beloved community became a reality for us in this month of July. And the words of Dr. King come to mind where he speaks about, for this reconciliation, beloved community to take place, for this beloved community place to a space to be grounded and founded, one needs a qualitative change in their hearts and a quantitative change in their lives.
Mm.
Uh, and it kind of has brought us reflecting even in our own space with a community in Joburg South called the Acoustic Community, is what is the change that will need to happen in our hearts? What's
Mm.
this qualitative change that we need to what quality needs to be changed in our being and in our soul? And then
Mm.
the quantitative change of our lives. How can we start to live life differently? So
Mm.
whether we have little or much, because there
Mm.
is this economic angle that we have
Mhm.
to deal with. I mean, like we've been saying to our community in Joburg South, listen, we may not have a lot, but at least 30 families since March we can walk with the
Mm.
little or the much we have in our hands. By what? Not what we can do, magical, majestic, macro stuff, but just the micro stuff of making sure that there's a solid food hamper that can reach out to people and help them in their time of need. Now we know we want them to have their own gardens, and we know we want them to we know we need to get them to the place where they can do their own fishing. But before we even get to that space, some people don't even have the basic necessities to get by. So it requires us to do a little bit of our quantities of resource. So,
Mhm.
Nontomi, as we begin to think, what have you been critically reflecting on? I mean, it's hard to talk about beloved community in a time like this, but I
Mm.
still believe it is a courageous
Mm.
conversation that we need to put out there for people to believe that even when we're all stacked up against us, we still can build this beloved community. What say you, my dear friend?
Yeah, you know what I've been saying to our congregation here and anywhere that people have asked me to speak is that, you know, this confluence of the pandemic and the heightened awareness of racial injustice took me back to the Kairos document of the 80s in South Africa. And it made me, for me, it seems like this is another Kairos moment, and maybe even a larger Kairos moment, a Kairos moment for the world, not just for South Africa and not just for the US. That this is a Kairos moment in that it is, these two things have highlighted what is wrong in our society. They have brought it to the fore so clearly. And so we can choose to take this opportunity when everything as we know it has been turned upside down and say, oh, I long for the good old days. Well, those good old days were not good old days for many, many people, for the vast majority of people around the world. And rather, we can take this as a God-given opportunity to say, what do we want our world to look like when we go back outside, when we go back to living a more or less normal life? And so for me, one of the, the quantitative things that this has given us an opportunity to do is, yes, to care about our neighbors, as you say, to be available to help in the ways that we can. I mean, one of the things that was really striking here is that when the pandemic first hit, you could not find toilet paper and you could not find hand sanitizer anywhere in grocery stores, et cetera, here in the US. I don't know who was stocking up on what they thought the pandemic was going to do with toilet paper. But I mean, there was no toilet paper on the shelves anywhere. And we have an organization here in Asheville called Beloved Asheville. And they put out the call. They said to people, if you have 4 rolls of toilet paper extra in your house, bring them to us. And they collected up, people were bringing toilet paper. And they collected to give to those people who were truly, and I share that one because I think, this is a silly example of what quantitative change looks like, right? It is saying, really, I don't need to hog the toilet paper. There will be toilet paper. And right now, there are people without toilet paper. And that change in our perception of why would we be hoarding at a time when there is so much need around our community. And so that is a small quantitative change. But those kind of changes lead us to start thinking about the larger quantitative changes, about when, Reverend Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas pointed out that, we talk about essential workers. And when we talk about essential workers, we're talking about people who work in grocery stores, people who work in meat packing factories, people who work in transportation, the people who clean hospitals, that these are all people that our government has designated as essential workers. But when we look at how they're treated, we are clearly not treating them as essential human beings. That we take away their humanity and instead make them simply workers. We don't care that they are people who also want to live. We don't care that they are parents or daughters or granddaughters or that they have families that they care about. And we are saying to them, you must work. And we don't care what happens when you go home. What if you have picked up the coronavirus, that you might pass it on to your grandmother who you are looking after. And so that's the qualitative change too. It's both a quantitative and a qualitative. The quantitative in saying, if we're saying they're essential workers, then we need to be thinking about how do we pay essential workers? How do we take care of essential workers' health care? But also the qualitative in that we're saying, how can we be calling them essential workers when we are not worried about the human beings behind that worker? That when we are saying you must go to the meat packing factory to work, that we're not asking who is living with you at home, who might be extra susceptible to coronavirus. And so for me, this time is actually truly a Kairos time, when God is giving us an opportunity to change the way we interact with one another, change the way we make economic and political policy, change the way that we look at each other, change the way that we care about one another.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you, and Naomi, for just landing that with us. This connection of a reality of what can be the change, how we can move towards space. In South Africa, I've been a part of a conversation at the Gordon Institute of Business Science, and I'm grateful for the work that has been put forward there by Dr. Morris and Tombeni and the team. But recently, there's been, a race dialogue, and it was quite courageous in this, in part of the response to saying, what can students that are pretty much adult students working in a business world uh, engage in through them landing their thoughts, ideas, and their pain on the table. And we came across, this topic that emerged for me to be considering, and it kind of disrupts us because we see that for many folk, being people who are by default lost in the system, or the system is designed to pressurize them, they have to carry the weight of the system. And now, you hear these kind of terminologies. People would say, like, well, if racism is a reality in your classroom or it's a reality in your workplace, well, sometimes you just got to get a thick skin. So I said, well, let's just stop the clock there for a while. What kind of metaphoric expression is that? What does it mean for us to have a thick skin? Now, I know it's kind of linked to kind of a metaphor that might be drawn out of a rhino or even an elephant. But I said, let's interrogate the metaphor. I'm not trying to be irregular in this, but interrogate it, because I think sometimes it is ridiculous that we are asking persons who are marginalized, persons who the system is already pushing to the edge where they feel like they're nobody, to get out of that system. And this is where we are calling here in South Africa for solidarity, for allies, for people to become those folk that will say, well, I want to make a stand alongside you. I cannot be just quiet in the space. And so it's been disruptive for us to begin to think upon the fatigue that persons who are living as marginalized have to bear. And what has been disrupted is, what can we do? So in my own example, as a male, identified as a male, what can I do and what am I willing to bear the brunt on for the sake of making a stand that ensures the quality of life and the quality of life of my fellow women colleagues and women clergy, of my wife and my daughter? What am I willing to stand for? So, Nontombi, this is some of the stuff that we find disrupting in our faith. We're having to say there's a need for an ideology and a theology and a sociology of justice. What these norms that have become norms, so that we can get away from a space where people who are very marginalized are bearing the brunt and facing the fatigue.
Yes. And I mean, in my own experience here as a Black woman clergy person in the United States, and in the Episcopal Church, which is a very white church in the U.S., I have also been saying to my former parishioners that one of the things that I said to you when I started working here, in fact, before I started working here, was that I have found that so when the conversation is about racial justice, when it is kind of esoteric and up there, the conversation about we want racial justice, we are willing to work for racial justice, and that means we are willing to sit in a room and sing kumbaya with people of different races, that white people get very excited and want to be part of that discussion. But I said to them, but I know that the time will come when I will ask and I will push on for real change that means that you have to be uncomfortable, change that means that you have to give up some of your white privilege in order for the change to happen. And my experience has been that when that conversation starts, when those actions start being pushed for, then people become very uncomfortable and become actually angry, particularly when the words are coming from a Black woman. So I am aware and I am warning you that I cannot be the one who is the one who is constantly raising these issues, because it becomes tiring. It becomes more than one can bear. And I actually ended up with a situation where I did say, this is too much. This is too much. I am willing to fight. I have always been willing to fight, but there comes a point where one has to say, my humanity also should be of concern. My health and well-being also should be of concern as a Black person, as a woman. And I think that both in the US and at home, that in particular, the experience of women is one that we don't talk about very much. The ways in which apartheid and post-apartheid have very much been on the backs of Black women, and that the ways in which gender-based violence in our communities is something that is taken very lightly, and women's whole lives being disrupted, women's lives being taken by gender-based violence is not something that we as a society in South Africa in particular allow to disrupt the ongoing comfort of men in South Africa. And that is something that must change. And I am glad that you have said that, as a man, I have to think about what is it that I need to give up? What is it that I must do? And I think that the move to have men hold other men accountable, that is an important move. That when your brother, your best friend talks about women in ways that dehumanizes women, to call them out on. When men grab women on the street and then swear at the woman who does not respond to their catcalls, that other men have to step up, whether it is your friend who is doing it or you're passing on the street. Don't allow that to happen. Men need to step up in their homes, on the street, on the job, in church, to the dehumanizing of women.
Well, powerfully said, and I'm feeling the vibration. And I know Vicentia Khabe says she totally agrees. She's feeling the vibrations right there in Grahamstown, and she's online, and it's great to have you. So please, Vicentia, you online, share the resource with some of your students as well. So as we think upon it, those of us who learned this word of fatigue, be aware of it in your church space, in your corporate space, in your academic institution. People who are living in the margins or the system is not set up for their rights. And begin to think about it. What are the designs that makes it easier for some to have access and others to be left aside? When you think upon making a stand, it might not need to be, you know that you want to become a freedom fighter, but it might be your WhatsApp chat.
Mm-hmm.
A WhatsApp chat with a whole group of guys, and irregular information comes in a way that starts to build a stereotypical, vulgar, pictorial images, and you guys know what I'm talking about out there on the WhatsApp chats. I mean, I can say this. We have a soccer chat with a few friends that play soccer. Well, prior to COVID-19, Saturday mornings, and we had to school our fellows in this chat to say, friends, this is a place where we don't want to be vulgar and disregarding of our women. However, I must say that there are some other spaces where this will not take place, where people are not willing to make a stand. And like you said, Nontombi, we gotta step into that space. Let's move to this last mode because I know Nontombi has made a moment to make sure that she's done with this time online so she can get to a family meeting. I love it. She can be where she likes, how she wants to be. She can be the Reverend Canon what, the right Reverend, the left Reverend, whatever he wants to be. But when the family say, when mommy and daddy says, hey, get to the meeting. So let's get to the close. The close is this: a call to action and service. Friends, if you're out there, how can you start to do significant intentional uh, plans and make those plans and designs and actions to start to disrupt the places and spaces of injustice in little ways and in, if you have the resources, in bigger ways. For us in Joburg South, as I said to you all, it has been what are the resources I have in my hand. I love the way that you spoke about the toilet paper. I was thinking about the song. What's that you have in your hand? I can use it if you're willing to lose it. I got myself there, on the toilet. But even the most menial thing, I mean, we have a friend who mentioned to me, I need someone to help me fix my taps. I don't have I don't have the resources. How can we come alongside those needs? And friends, the little actions of kindness and love, even though we might say, man, that's not any justice, those little actions add to a big moment where we can actually say that becomes a movement. Many little movements becomes a big movement. And so, Nontombi, from your experience and your leadership, what can you say to us at this time of a call to action and service for hopefully, like you said, a new normal future, not an old normal future, a new normal future, one where there is equality, one where there's equitability, one where we're not just an equality for some, but equality.
And I mean, my call has always been the same, and it is that we have to be a both and people. So we have to be a people who look at what is going on systemically, and be active in politics, in economic policy making. We have to be ones who demand that there be more voices in those discussions that that regulate our lives politically and economically. I mean, for instance, in South Africa, I know that right now there is the whole conversation around the IMF structural adjustment loan, and yet we have economists in South Africa who are putting forward a more radical version of, and a more caring version of, what a South African economy should look like. And those voices, we need to push for those voices to be heard. Those economists who are saying, we have the resources in South Africa to do economics a different way. We have to push for the space for people who are saying, what is the political change that we need to be? So we need to be both people who are focused systemically, those people who are focused on what we can do in our individual capacity as caring human beings. So as you say, to be the ones collecting the food hampers for our neighbors, the ones who tutor our students, the ones, one of the examples that I have shared in this country is of St. Thomas Church in Kagiso, a tiny church where the people themselves are not wealthy, but they established a garden, a vegetable garden at the neighboring school. They were feeding children 3 times a week. They collected money for school uniforms for children and books and shoes from people who themselves were not wealthy. That if we say that we, particularly we as the church, that and what they said, which I loved, was that, you know, the things that we do, we don't call those outreach, because this is not outreach. Everything we do is about worshiping God. And so this is another way that we worship, by taking care of our neighbors, because our God told us, you shall love thy Lord our God with all your heart, with all your mind, and with all your understanding, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So we are an and people, a people who must be active in our own individual and church and faith community, as well as being political and economic activists.
Halala, Reverend Nontombi Tutu, halala. Now, I want to close off in style. Those of you that are out there, economically speaking, check out some of the work that's being put out by Kate Raworth on, and they call it Amsterdam, and adopted some of it, noted as donut economics. Think upon what we need to do to transform our economic system. We can't affect the globe, we can't affect the USA right now. But like Nontombi Tutu has said to us here in our own context in South Africa, think about it in the globe, wherever you're at. You can be in Germany, you can be in Calcutta. If you're a place of worship, what are your acts of worship? Is justice not an act of worship?
Exactly.
Is loving those that don't have not an act of worship? So, friends, let's deepen our acts of worship. Like Micah suggests to us, the acts of worship to act justly, to love mercy, and walk humbly with God. I want to bring it and use it up in style, because I know you can feel Nontombi, even though she's not with me in the room. I've been in many spaces with everybody else. I remember in Dubuque, Iowa, she brought down the house. I was over in one other section doing another keynote, and she was over in another space when we got there to the University of Dubuque, Iowa, and we were the South African brigade. Well, she being in the States and me coming on the way from home. But we had an amazing time. So to keep that vibe going and to encourage you, my dear sister, and for those of you that are online, it's been going viral. Check this out. It's been going viral. And I got a few clergy that went online with it. I'm hoping that it's going to come through. Just give me a second as the thread pushes it through. But Jerusalem, anybody? Jerusalem has been going viral all over the world. So let's check this out. Aha. We want to have a space where we can do our work, believing that there's a greater day or a greater hope. Yeah. It's true. The Tutu family, and thank you so much for being a part of the show today.
Thank you.
Thank you, my dear friend.
Thank you.
In conversation, you with your rev. Greetings to Mpilo and the girls.
All right.
It's been an amazing time in conversation with Reverend Nontombi Tutu. Thank you for joining us. This is Seth Nike signing off from Johannesburg, South Africa, in my LA, aka Hamilton. Look forward to being with you next week. We are bringing Dr. Get this right, Dr. Tara. Dr. Tara Chung of the Indian Theological University in New York. She currently is in Korea, and she's going to be part of a 12:30 slot on the 5th of August. As we go into South Africa as our Women's Month, we want to take this idea of the equitability and the sanctity of our women, our girl children, into August, when we begin to speak upon women's choices, and we get to kick off this series of conversational story sharing with Dr. Chun, Dr. Tara Chun, activist and an feminist. So thank you all for joining in today. It's been a great time in studio. Peace out till we meet again. Thank you, Vasentia, for joining us as well and being a part of this time. Please join us again next week, August 5th, when we return to do more conversational story sharing in such a time as this, when we believe story has the power to close the gaps between the I and the other. Thank you very much from myself, Seth Naiker, and our studios here in Johannesburg, South Africa. We hope we've earned the privilege of your time. Take care and be blessed.